introduce our speaker this morning, who again I think needs no introduction. He is our leader of the band, our jamming man. But also, I had the pleasure, the first time I think I spent any time with Bruce was in Seattle at the conference, and of course that was strumming the guitar and having to sing along. And I really don't get to talk to Bruce when he's playing because he's in the zone. But then last summer, I had the opportunity to work with him and teach a faculty program with him. And I was just so impressed with his counseling skill and his gentle manner and his true command of choice theory. And I couldn't think of a better person to deliver this particular topic and keynote this morning, so I'd like you to join me in welcoming Bruce Springsteen Allen.
Thank you. Well, it's quite an honor to be here. I've typically, over the years, go to this conference, and one of these addresses, there's either Wade Glasser or Bob Bowlby or someone who has many books and quite a reputation in the Institute. I guess now I have been around here for a while, since 1987 when I was certified, so if we're lining up in terms of date, who's next? One of the things that I thought last night, I really enjoyed the trip up to Niagara Falls. And the hurricane deck, I thought, a lot of times in our work we look for moments and spaces of intensity in which we know that's where change is facilitated and change occurs. So I'm not sure if I changed on hurricane deck last night or not, but I was imagining, we've got location, we have setting, we take our clients up there to hurricane deck, and we can add a few other elements to this. Now face north, now face south, now face east, now face west, and release your anxieties and your fears to the hurricane deck. So, anybody, I think we're going to move to Buffalo, and we'll do that. It sounds like a good thing to do at this point in my career. Well, see, there were some of us up there talking choice theory as people were standing in the vortex. Maybe it was happening, I don't know. No, but we look for those points, we look for those opportunities, we look for that opportunity to create change when there is some convention that's released. And I just evidenced that. This is a fun group generally, and sometimes we sing together and we make noise, but people were squealing. This has to be good when Bob Wobbling is screaming. Wow. Some folks, they're dressed so nice and so well reserved, and then here they were letting it loose. I thoroughly enjoyed that. So I thank her for the opportunity to talk to you this morning. Hey, 1 second ago. Push the button on the computer. Okay, well, that's all right. Sometimes our communication it doesn't quite, our mirror neurons weren't quite syncing up, so we just have to touch it. So. All right, so, when I was contacted about giving this address, which was like 4 months ago, and within 2 days, well, tell us what you're going to talk about. Well, I'm going to tell you that it took me 4 months to figure out what I was going to talk about. And this morning, I was still tweaking on the PowerPoint, so it's like, it works now. Thank you. Creating that connection. This one here? Must be with your finger. No, that's okay. I'll try. All right. I really wasn't sure what to talk about, and I'm trying to think, why do you want me to do this? It's like, okay, well, Kim is involved in this. We did get a chance to work together. We had a great time working together. So there was something that felt right about that. And I've been around here for quite a while, and maybe she hoped I would bring my guitar and sing a song, but not this morning. So I thought, well, let's talk about who we are and what do we stand for. What does that mean? I mean, those are such common questions that we hear. And so that may not mean to me what you think that it means. So as we go through this presentation, you'll find out. But I do have something I'd like to engage you in. It's not actually a song, but it involves a vocalization. How are your vocal cords this morning? Like that. So when I was a kid, probably about 12 years old, I was in the Boy Scouts. And it was a very pleasurable experience. I'm also from a single parent home, so my mother wanted to be sure I was around lots of men who could mentor me, which was a good idea. We used to take lots of hikes, and someone came up with something. They said, well, we have a chant for you. And this is an African work song, and I don't know if this is true or not. And I don't know if I have the lyrics right or not, and I decided at some point, I really like this chant. I remembered it, and now I've actually written it into the song, which we're not going to sing this morning, but I'm going to ask you to chant with me, because I've found that a lot of times when I'm on a hike or I'm on something that's taking time with a group of people where we want to create some group spirit, this is kind of a fun thing to do. So I'm going to do it first, and this is actually call and answer. So then I'm going to do it and ask you to answer. So pay close attention the first time I do this, right? You all know Swahili? Does anybody know Swahili? Oh no. I might be in trouble. I mean, this might be saying something really rude. So here it goes. Apere peke tumba. Amusa, musa, musa. Amusa, musa, musa. Oh, elele. Oh, elele. Oh, ele, maleva, malve. Oh my gosh. I've never heard anybody pick that up. I know the last part involves a laugh. There really is a laugh in there, but I just didn't put it in. All right, so let's try this one more time. Apere peke tumba. Apere peke tumba. Amusa, musa, musa. Amusa, musa, musa. Oh, elele. Oh, elele. Oh, ele, maleva, malve. Oh, ele, maleva, malve. I like it. That also loosens me up. This is something where it gets my voice sort of going, and singing and chanting always reduces anxiety for me. So thank you for helping me out with that. I hope you enjoyed that too. All right, so I was in this position of whining and thinking of all the other folks who might be better suited to do this than and I've let go of that. This was Kim. So I thought along the way, it's like, I wanted to ask her, do you know what's on my mind? I'm going to talk about what's on my mind. Do you realize what's on my mind? So like when I was 8 years old, I wondered if perhaps I was going to be in hot water for saying the things I wanted to say today. So this is me at Disneyland at 8 years of age. Here we go. That's me. That's right. I did have hair then. I didn't have a beard. So it came to me, question, are we Glassarian? Now I have heard, since we've been here, I've heard talk about so many different practitioners, theorists, philosophers, other people, other than Glasser, that are incredibly consistent and seem to link with the ideas that we know. So if we're Glassarian, does that mean that we just talk about Glasser? I know, you didn't know he looked like that. I like the bow tie, you know, it's like he and Aaron Beck probably were hanging out about that time. So is Glasser Glassarian? What does that mean? Well, I got some more, so I thought you'd enjoy that. And honoring him today, because I'm going to challenge some ideas. I do it all in the best spirit of honoring our founder, who has changed my life or has offered information that I have used to change my life. So first of all, I wonder, why are we attracted to these ideas? You know, I keep meeting people and talking to them and say, you know, I was talking to Des, and we had this glance together last night. He goes, I said, well, you're kind of a rebel, aren't you? He said, yeah, kind of like you. Oh, well, you know, it struck me that, you know, Bill, when he started teaching his ideas, he said, this idea I have is really good because it's not that. This idea I really have is good because it's not that. And then I had the interesting experience of rereading one of his older books that I first read as Control Theory, but recently reread the version of that, Take Effective Control. What is the title of that? Well, I know more of what's inside of it that's on the cover. And he says this thing that I didn't realize was in there, and I've always thought this about psychotherapies because most people make them up and then try to prove that they're efficacious. And why do they make them up in the way they do? It's like, because I think it fits our personality in some way. It fits our views of the world in some way. And I read this part in the book where he said, well, you know, I wasn't so lucky growing up. I had the sort of mother who was very controlling and very critical. It's like, oh, so you've developed a theory and approach that says no one should coerce anybody else, and I am responsible for my own actions. Sort of leave me alone. It's like, oh, I mean, it was all about autonomy. It was all about responsibility and autonomy in that statement that I can take care of myself, I can make good decisions, I can have good relationships, and I don't need you to try to control me. Okay, well, sorry, I've just deconstructed, at least from my point of view, where Glasser started, and I wonder how many of us started from the same point of view. You know, I wonder, the people that I end up spending the most time with, what are they like? It's like, you know, they're like me, totally involved, totally love the ideas, and at any given moment, are totally willing to deconstruct any of them and say, maybe this is really nothing at all. And that's just been my journey, and probably many of you, your journey too. I have picked up and tried to pick up and throw away reality therapy and choice theory for 25 plus years. I'd say the last 15, it's just kind of stuck. I can't kind of get rid of it all. I've tried to get rid of it. So I guess I wonder, I think it's important to know, and I'm a therapist. I know there are therapists here, there are educators here, but we're all engaged in therapeutic interactions with people, hopefully helpful interactions with people. That it's important to sort of know where we come from and why this is important to us, and why this fits for us. And I think this is universal. But I wonder sometimes why all my clients seem to have control issues with people they're in a relationship with. Is it because Glasser is right, or is it because that's my issue? And maybe it's both, and maybe that's okay. Okay, so in my question is Glasser Glasserian? I think he really has been several things to us. I'm not sure he's Glasserian in the sense of being completely loyal to a particular set of ideas, because one of the things that's excited me so much over the years is he's changed. He's evolved, he's changed. Each book, as you trace his ideas through the years, he changed. And like a good artist, it's sometimes frustrating to the rest of us. He says, you know, that stuff that I did before, don't pay any attention to that. I mean, to me, that's a sign of an artist and a thinker. You know, of course, the deal is, all of us, many of us, like all of that work. Gosh, somebody mentioned positive addictions yesterday. It's like, wow, seminal work. How many people coming into the Institute now know about the book Positive Addictions and what it's all about, and that it's about consciousness? Here we're talking about brain and mind, and he was talking about consciousness and states of mind that can help us to be better people. But he's not talking about that at some point, and that's fine, but I hope that we don't. So he's a conduit to great ideas. He's been a great teacher for us. He's helped to form an organization of like-minded people, generally speaking. He's offered us the freedom to include our ideas. And I've heard him so many times say, well, that's how I do it. Do it however you like. Do it from your own personality. Do it from your own framework of thinking. It's like, that sort of says that he's not asking me to be Glasserian. He's asking for me to be Bruce Allen and use his ideas as best I can. And I fully endorse that. Now, I understand that when we learn something new, being in allegiance is important, because we know what is, what are the ideas and what are not the ideas. But as we grow, as we begin to integrate other notions and other ideas, I think that he has all along given us that message that that's okay, that that's a good idea. And he would celebrate us talking about brain-based learning, even though he never did. Well, maybe he did, but not in the same terms. He also has served as a litmus tester. Now, this is a particular challenge for us, I think. You know, because if you go to Glasser, and a lot of people have, and said, hey, what do you think about this new idea? And he goes, oh yeah, I like that, let's do that. Or, no, that's good for you. I'm not gonna go that way. You know, we had a fellow at one point that said, and had quite a bit of support in the organization, as though it were a political thing, to add another basic need. What was it? Faith. Faith is a fifth psychological need. There was a nice article in the journal about it. He made presentations about it and proposed it to Glasser. And Glasser said, well, I've already quoted him. He said, that's fine for you. You can have as many needs as you want. But I'm not adopting it. I'm not writing that. But that's fine. You go ahead. It's like, wow. But he has been the litmus tester to let us know, does this fit or does this not fit? Okay, so I'm going to go through these a little bit. He's been the conduit. Some folks have told me that would be heresy if you put William Powers' picture up there. After all, he founded control theory. We don't say that word anymore. I haven't heard anyone talk about William Powers this week. However, he offered something terrific to Glasser, great to Glasser, which he has continued to develop and to evolve and teach to us in a very usable form. Powers wasn't quite as usable in my mind. So Glasser found perceptual control theory. Wow, that sounds pretty intense. But Glasser said, this explains why reality therapy works. Wow, okay, so we see now that we are a negative feedback loop and that we behave because of some sort of discomfort. Now, I could have awoken this morning and decided my needs were satisfied. I didn't need to talk to you. I didn't need to get up. I would just stay in bed. If I was perfectly in balance. But I got this little feedback loop, this little jolt that said, oh, you're supposed to talk this morning, and you're not talking this morning yet. So that was a negative example of the negative feedback loop. It's like, oh, I got that little signal that said, let's go. He also served as a conduit because he wanted to find some type of models for interaction. And I've noticed that his changed over the years. Of course, he's focused more on relationships and gotten into how systems work and how we treat one another in systems. At first, this was a self-psychology. It was about you're responsible for yourself, you're responsible for your choices. What is it that you want? What is it that you need? How do you go about living your life in a way that your needs are satisfied? Well, so he decided, well, we need to expand that really to how we treat other people. So we picked up some ideas from W. Edwards Deming. Thus the entry of the term quality within Glasser's work. It didn't exist before that. He knew that there was something that we were all after. He says, gosh, this really provides us a way to explain that. We're all after quality. And it was the beginning of him really talking about how do we treat each other. I mean, before that, we were responsible. We met our needs in a way that didn't frustrate somebody else. It was pretty much all he said about that before this. So now this idea begins to expand. Okay. And I know I'm preaching to the choir with a lot of you guys. It's like, okay, let's keep going here. So he wanted a way to also define how do we enter into our relationships in such a way that we can have relationships that are need satisfying for us and for other people. And how can we influence and teach other people in such a way that is not harmful to them, that is not coercive to them. Now, this one is a little bit questionable as to where did these 7 habits come from? Okay. Well, he says, I like his casual way, somewhat irreverent way. I can be that way sometimes myself. He says, well, that guy Stephen Covey had 7 habits, so I can have 7 habits. Okay. I'm sure there was more to it than that. But I recognize those habits as, I used to teach from communication theory back in the 80s, the dirty dozen of communication. Any of you teach those things, the dirty dozen? Sure, so we already knew these deadly habits, and communication stoppers and communication helpers. These are familiar ideas, and yet he's encapsulated this into choice theory in a way that's very useful. And And I would suggest that he would probably answer it if he said, well, I have more habits. I know of more caring habits. I know of more deadly habits. He would probably say, well, go ahead and add them to your list. I think that's the way he is. Okay, so he has been, of course, a great teacher. His writings have been popular worldwide. His ideas have been parsimonious. They're not overly complicated. You can teach them to elementary school children, teach them to very young children. I'm now consulting with a Head Start program, and I'm going to work on helping teach teachers and help them figure out a way to teach preschoolers, or 0 to 6, or 0 to 5, as they're now calling that. They're changing their model a little bit, pick up these really young kids. It's understandable by a very broad audience. And I worked in the university setting for 15 years and had people say, it's too simple, that sounds like a self-help manual. Well, he took that risk because he wanted to present his ideas in such a way that they really could be understood by the world. And I appreciate him doing that. It's up to us to complicate it if we want to. And I'm sure we have, and we will. So, I didn't shoot his finger. That was It's just sort of an off and on thing, I guess. Okay, so the other thing is he has developed his ideas from his direct experience, working in Veterans Hospital, working in youth correctional facilities, schools, and prison in Los Angeles. And I think really most of us are practitioners. We really enjoy the fact that he was there, he was working on these ideas, so he went into the field and he worked with them. He didn't just send a bunch of graduate students out and say, hey, y'all try this out and we'll research it. Maybe in some days it would have been better for us if he had, but I really appreciate the fact that when he had a good idea, he went somewhere and he worked on it, he worked it out and practiced it. And he's demonstrated his strategies directly. You know, one of the things that, now, maybe I've missed a couple of workshops here. Were there role plays in some of the workshops? Okay, good. Yeah, so he's always been willing to try to role play, to try to demonstrate, find some way to show us what he means, and has done that sometimes very humorously. Okay. Maybe, probably so. Okay, so then as a teacher, he's also, as I mentioned before, he's juxtaposed his ideas against other things. Now, as a method of influence, how often do we do that? We say, what I've got is good because something else is not so good. Now, that's very effective method of influence. It's something that probably we all use in our teaching. He has used it extensively. The last quote that I heard from him is, well, what is choice theory? Well, that's exactly the opposite of stimulus response. It's like, okay, well, he's still creating these polarities, and that's the way that he teaches. I heard it suggested, I think, by Dr. Black recently, that we've been showing for many years how we're different from everybody else. That maybe sometimes we have the opportunity, maybe now we have the opportunity to show how we connect with other ideas and with everyone else. So we've had kind of a combination of these things along the way. I'm getting some real assistance here. Okay, so and he also helped us to set up this organization. Folks said, hey, train us in your ideas. And so this was the beginning of the Institute. I was not there at that time. That was just before the dawning of time. We might have a couple of folks who were here in that time. Sorry, Bob. And then began to form an organization that he basically led or strongly influenced until about 2 years ago. Some of you know that, some of you don't know that. But we have had an advisory board for many years, advisory. So his hand has been very strong in the running of the organization. And that's basically changed over the last couple of years. And now, guess what? We're on our own. The baby has launched. We are out of the nest in that sense because he said, God's taken. Let's see. Oh, you got another one. That one works. Okay. So, as you know, the Institute for Reality Therapy, as he initially called it, had an expanding mission where we moved into schools. Teachers didn't want to say, I'm trained in therapy now. Well, you're He's still trained in therapeutic communications, but somehow it was easier if we changed the name of this organization, and he did it to the William Glasser Institute in 1996. And I appreciate that, because certainly we're more than just a process of reality therapy. So of course, many countries have developed their own branch, including the U.S. And WGI, as we knew it before, is basically dissolved and began a process of becoming an international and an organization within all the countries. Okay, so freedom. So freedom to practice with your own creativity. You can have as many needs as you want. That WGI has had a listing of topic areas for our training. Do we have a training manual? Someone was telling me that Covey manual that's leather bound and it's tabbed and it's got lots of sections and it tells you exactly what to do, and the instructor training is basically going through the manual so you'll know how to comply. Now, we've had discussions over the years about, should we do that? Do we need rubrics? Do we need to dictate to our instructors what they teach? And we basically have chosen not to do that. Most instructors, let's see if there's anyone here who doesn't, adds in ideas from other practitioners, other theorists as they teach. Now, probably not so much on the basic level, but beyond that, there's all kinds other ideas that we hear. Now, I think that we have a great model for that. I was having a discussion last night with someone about the Erickson Institute. They're getting ready to have a conference in December. There'll be 8,000 people there. One of the things they do, you can count on the Erickson Institute, is there'll be a strong Ericksonian component, and then everybody else is invited. Okay. Other theorists, other therapists, other writers, and all celebrated. And you can learn about a lot of different forms of therapy, not just Ericksonian based there. And I feel that in some sense, we're beginning to do that too. We have workshops on other models. So some of them that have been popular here, Covey has been, Daniel Pink, Eric Jensen we heard about, the Johnson Institute, schools and learning circles, Sterling Baldridge, Deming, lots of folks that we begin to integrate into this. So we've had the freedom to do that over the years. Here's my litmus paper. Glasser's also been the litmus test. So what do we do with that now that, he has, on rare occasions, even said, no, you can't teach that. Are we going to do that now? Are we going to say, no, you can't teach that? If you're teaching Glasser, you can't say someone else's name. And who's going to decide that? Will that be us? Will it be the board that's going to dictate that? Will it be the whole organization? Where's that going to go? So, are we Glasserians? If we are moving into a post-Glasser era in our organization, how do we do that successfully? Will we become a historical society, or will we be a catalyst for change? Some of the challenges ahead of us. Give us the answer. Give me the answer. All right. We're going to be both. We're going to honor our tradition, we're going to honor the best ideas that we have, and we're going to grow, and we're going to expand. All right. Was Bill ever static? Only for short periods of time. Does he hope that we'll be static and just say those lines? If we do this for another 20 years, we can memorize all the lines in all those books, and we know exactly what to say in any given situation. But do you want that? So our new job is to carry forth and expand these ideas, but this may well challenge us. Now, we've already changed our organization. We have a new board. We have a need to move to evidence-based practice, because if we don't have a guy like Bill saying, this is true, this is good, and this is what we need to do, are there any of us that could stand up with the power that Bill Glasser did worldwide and say that? Okay. So we have to move to other evidence, not just by our own credibility, although our own credibility is certainly part of that, but we've got to move to showing that there is increasing evidence that what we do is effective. And I think we're doing that. We need to redefine what we need from our organization. I've heard people say recently, well, the board has really not been very effective. It's like, well, what do you mean? Well, 2 years ago, it's like, the board of the current organization was established in December, January. We were only incorporated in February. So it's brand new. It's an opportunity for everyone to contribute, and hopefully the things that we want, we're trying to listen as a board to the people in the organization. Where do you want this to go? What's the William Glasser Institute doing for me? Well, guess what? The William Glasser Institute now more than any other time is all of us. There's not one person or two people up there saying this is how it's going to go. So, we've got to define our roles, duties, dues. You haven't paid any dues to the William Glasser Institute US. No one has. We paid international, but how do we fund ourselves? Something we have to work out. How do we collaborate? So, here's that symbol that I'm sure that you've seen. Sometimes it's considered a crisis. I don't consider this a crisis, but it's a danger and an opportunity. So we've relied on him to guide us. Now we're going to have to do that. So some of the wisdom of M. Scott Peck comes to mind about community, because if we become an effective, and we continue to be, I think, an effective community, how do we need to proceed, and what things do we need to be cautious about? Well, I thought you might like to see a couple of my vacation pictures too. I was definitely in effective control driving down Highway 1 between Monterey and Big Sur. There was no way not to be. As long as you weren't in a hurry, it's okay. So M. Scott Peck, in the book The Different Drum, talks about a pseudo-community or a real community. And M. Scott Peck, one of the jobs that he had before he wrote this book was to travel around to various churches within his region that were having dysfunction and difficulty. And he met with them, he met with the minister. These were churches that were splintering, forming new churches from the existing ones. Certainly that has happened in the history of our organization as well. And firing ministers and that sort of thing. So he went in and he began to talk to people, and he learned that there were churches, like other organizations, where everyone got together and said, yeah, we all believe the same thing. Yes, we're all in agreement. We know we are because we know the source of our information, and we know that it's good, and we all believe that. He calls this a pseudo-community because he suggests that folks that did that and never really went through that phase of having an honest, open, sometimes challenging discussion about the ideas and about what they were about, they tended to splinter, judge one another, and chaos ensued. Is this the danger? No, I think we can have this open dialogue. We have a way to do that. We have 7 habits. Okay? We also have reality therapy. We have a method of inquiry that includes exploration. We have a respect for one another. So a real community has an open exchange of ideas. No one attempts to heal or convert anyone else, coerce anyone else. Okay. And as some folks have stated, there are no choice theory police. Now, I know that we tend to do that when we're learning. We scan when someone's talking. Does this fit with what I believe? Does this fit with choice theory? Would Glasser agree with that? Okay. So I'm suggesting that in a real community that we attempt to learn from what people say and try to hold off, take our badges off, and our policemen's hats off a little bit, and try to understand where people are coming from. Now, Peck didn't say no choice theory of police, of course, but there were plenty of police, I'm sure, holders of the mantle in the churches that he worked with. So we have a model for this. Well, we have our relationship habits, we have the reality therapy process, and then we have another picture from my vacation. I find these ideas to be quite challenging. I think really, if any other, more than any other organization that I've been a part of, we are equipped, we are ready to have, and to continue to be a real community. So where do we fit? Glasser made this stuff up, and we know, I know from it, originally it's like it's not behaviorism, it's not Skinnerian. It's not Freudian, right? So we know what it's not. Where do we fit overall? Now, of course, most of us realize that we're part of a movement in our culture. That these ideas are not specific to us. They're not specific to William Glasser. They're put together in such a way by Bill's genius that they fit really well, we can use them really well and teach them really well. But they exist in other places. Thank you. Are we part of the third wave in psychology? You heard this terminology? Some folks are promoting this, saying that therapies are new. You know, again, we need to find a way to show how we're different, so this doesn't come from us. The first wave, we were concerned about what happened in the past because we know that determined. It was a very deterministic sort of model. We know what happened to you before is going to affect who you are now, and you can't really change that. Your personality is pretty well set. It was very disease-oriented. There is something wrong with you. Gee, I still see some of that going on. It's very pathology and deficits focused. You know, I'm going to say that's so 1920s. And the therapist was the expert. Oh, that sounds like a good one. I'm the expert. There's something wrong with you. And if you're with me long enough, we can uncover your past and we can fix that. Sounds like job security. Okay. Well, hopefully we become more enlightened in that. Psychoanalysis, some family origin work, early trauma work, focus work. It's really sitting right there. And of course, we still have some of these things going on. If you ask psychologists across the U.S., how many of them will say that what they practice is psychodynamic psychotherapy? I'd venture to say high percentage of them. Okay, so what would be the education corollary to this first wave? Well, I remember in preparation for this, I was reading an old book about Maria Montessori. And now in 1910, she was considered a heretic because she said we can take those children out of that institution that we know are mentally retarded and they're too young to learn, and we can teach them. And she was pretty much rushed out of town. Okay? You can't do that. You're crazy. Where do you spend your time? And this crazy woman, where did she come from? Well, she was a surgeon. It's like, how does a surgeon move into this area of deciding that, you know what, maybe there's hope for these kids? That wasn't that long ago. 1910, it was set by genetics, it was set by what they were born with. They couldn't change. Gee, that sounds a little bit like some of the early psychotherapies too. Well, we can change it, but it's going to take a couple of years. The IQ was pretty well determined, and she said, no, it's not. That's not just set. That's not in the genes necessarily. Of course, now the folks who are talking about brain are talking about gene activation. Well, she was talking about gene activation, but she didn't use neurological terminology to explain that. But she's saying, yeah, we can activate these kids' brains. We can teach them. She's very much in our corner in that sense. In this first way, the teacher was an expert and needed a high degree of control over the kids. Old school now, that first way. Oh, I just wanted to make a point. You know, one of the things that she worked with children that they called mentally retarded, or there was even another term at that point for those kids. And most of us disparage the DSM, Diagnostic and Statistical Manual for Mental Disorders, 5, and yet they have changed. The term mental retardation is no longer a legitimate medical term, according to the DSM. Okay, the DSM-5 uses the term intellectual disability. Okay. So just give one nod to this disease model that they're doing maybe something right. So hopefully they've helped us there. On the education perspective of this first wave, Glasser also challenged this in his 1975 book, Schools Without Failure. So kids don't have to fail. They're not predetermined to fail by their background, by their genetic, by anything else. There is hope. The second wave in psychology was more present-oriented. Okay, well, maybe we can't change all that stuff in the past. Maybe we shouldn't spend 2 or 3 years working with you figuring out how to do that. The current cause and how you maintain, what kind of antecedents were there to your behavior, what sort of context is there to their behavior that we can work on changing, and we've got to fix this problem. The therapist, again, is the expert. I know what your problem is. I've diagnosed it. We know how to fix that. I saw an incredible presentation at Evolution Psychotherapy Conference by a cognitive therapist, Christine Podesky. I don't know if any of you ever heard her. She's a brilliant woman. Her diagnostic tool was about 25 pages long, and she basically asks you everything that you think about everything, goes through that and figures out what all your thinking errors are, and then writes your prescription and a program for how to go about changing your thinking. This is a great example of this sort of model. It made perfect sense. However, what's missing? Relationship, volition on the part of the client. But the therapist is the expert, and she knows, and I'll tell you, if you went to see Christine Podesky, you would change, because she's a very powerful woman. So it was her own charisma, I think, that would encourage you, and her own incredible knowledge that would help you to change. However, second wave. Okay? So behavioral therapies, cognitive behavioral therapies, which is, gee, now that's the largest evidence-based group of therapies, cognitive behavioral, often very structured, very focused on your problems and changing what you think and do, and some other therapies as well. So now, these folks that talk about the waves of psychotherapy talk about the third wave. Are we in the third wave? When did this happen? Is this the 90s? Is this the 2000s? I suggest that William Glasser was part of the third wave in 1965. Does any of these books that talk about the three waves talk about that? They don't know that. They're really missing out. We need to invite them to one of our conferences so they realize that we've been here for a long time. It's not oriented to cause. We're not looking for that thing in your past that happened that created you to be how you are today. It's oriented towards solutions. We're not so focused on the problem. I've heard Glasser role plays where people describe their problem. You've seen these, and then you talk about their problem. Completely past that. So, like, who you get along with, who's important to you, what kind of relationships do you have? These third waves are focused on resources and competence. What do you have? What do you bring to the table that can really make a difference here? They're collaborative. The therapist is not so much the expert, that we work together. It was heresy in the psychotherapy field when Glasser said, make friends. You realize what happened with that in the psychoanalytic world? When they said, make friends with your students, make friends with your clients. Like, whoa, transference, run amok. What is this? What is this thing? Oh my God. How can you do that? How can we really engage with people? We have to have that professional distance. Lay on the couch, talk to me, and I'll fix your problems. Anyway, so it's very individualized. So some of the therapies in the third wave, perhaps, there are some other friends that we have that might be moving in that direction. Again, I think that we were at the top, and we were way back when the other folks were first waving. Okay. Solution focused moves that way. Some folks say, well, that just sounds like reality therapy. Solution focused, you're asking about what behavior do you have to bring to bear to this situation that might be helpful, and what is it that you really want? That doesn't bother me. That just proves to me that we're onto something. Strengths perspective, I'm a social worker. Well, we're hammered home about not talking about pathology. We're hammered home about talking about what do you got, what do you bring to the table, what are your relationships that you want to work with, what inner strengths do you have, what resources do you have in the community, and other possibility therapies. I don't know where I came up with that term, possibility therapy. I must have found that in my research. Self-determination. Self-determination theory talks about that we are really all internally motivated, and what we have to do as helpers, as teachers, or as counselors is to help people to tap what they really already know and what they already want for themselves. Positive psychology. Uh-oh, do we need to worry about positive psychology? You know, I really like Marty Seligman, who started this movement, was the president of the American Psychological Association for a long time. He writes that he was working in the garden with his little granddaughter, She was about 7 or 8, I think, at the time. And she says, "Granddaddy, you say your work is about trying to help people get happy?" She said, "Why are you always so grumpy?" And he said it was at that point where he had the epiphany that his great contribution of the self-fulfilling prophecy, I missed the term. What was Marty's term? Learned helplessness. This is his large contribution to psychology, learned helplessness. He said, "You know what? I was all wrong. We shouldn't be spending our time uncovering learned helplessness. We should be working on learned optimism. How can we make that switch?" It's like, thanks to Marty's granddaughter, because he's a very powerful person in the field. In a way, I mean, we can't suggest that. Someone said, we got to get there before positive psychology does. It's like, yeah, I like that. A little bit of competition is helpful. But he's in a very powerful position to promote some of these ideas too. Acceptance and commitment therapies from another one. Glasser's been on the cutting edge of all of this. One more vacation picture. All right, so we have, let's just look at, I'm going to go look at a couple of central ideas and ask you then to help me out with some more. What are the things that are most fundamental to us? And you have note cards on your table there that you can write those on when we kind of get to that. I thought I'd better tell you that I recently did a workshop with Head Start teachers, and it was on assertiveness. And I decided that to help them illustrate assertiveness, we do role plays, and I gave them a squishy ball, and I gave them a rock out of my backyard, and I gave them a marshmallow. Now, what happened, of course, this activity was to, in your role play, to discriminate whether or not someone was being assertive or passive or aggressive, and you hold up your rock, your marshmallow, or your little squishy ball. Well, you know what these Head Start teachers did? They put the rock on the ground, they ate the marshmallow, and they stuffed the little squishy ball in their purse. So anyway, I thought I'm going to tell you the purpose of these index cards is I'm going to ask you to write something on them here in just a minute. So, now you got a nice purple index card. You might think, but I've already stuck that in your pocket, so I can use that. So anyway, so I'm going to talk about a couple of these, and I'm going to ask you to fill in the blanks on what else do we have, and suggest to you too that there are folks that are doing research in common factors. And it's some incredible research looking at 25, 30 years of psychotherapy literature and finding out what are the things that all these therapies have in common that are helpful. And this is incredibly enlightening literature. So I think it's helpful for us to look at our common factors. It's also been suggested that perhaps if it's difficult to research our method in its whole, how can we research and prove by some of the parts that these ideas are useful? I think all of these are good ideas. So what choice? We have choice about what we do, think, or feel. Now, it's possible to get too Dr. Phil about this and to oversimplify this because we understand that we don't really want to say, well, that's your choice. Are we guilty of doing that sometimes? Well, you can choose to stop depressing. Huh? Now we know, particularly if you're a helper, you're a teacher, you're a counselor, that the timing of these sorts of interventions are very important. So I hope that when we suggest to people that they choose almost everything about their experience, that's not something that's glib, such as this diagram suggests. Well, you're not happy? Well, then change. Okay. I had to do that. I've certainly done that effectively in every area of my life. Perfectly happy, healthy, and no difficulties. It's best to focus on what we can change. Right? That's a brand new idea. Glasser made that up. That we should focus on what we can change. Oh, the secret of change is to focus all your energy not on fighting the old, but on building the new. Socrates, huh? It's important to take responsibility for our behavior. Oh, well, I like this. His Holiness the 14th, Dalai Lama, suggests that when you think everything is someone else's fault, you will suffer a lot. This is one of the most core ideas of William Glasser. I'm just so pleased to know that it's been around. To me, that means that we've got shoulders that we can stand on. We have history that we can build upon. These ideas are universal. We just have a great way of teaching them. Now, I don't know what you think about this guy, but John Falsart says, man chooses and makes himself by acting. Oh my gosh. That's Glasser, right? I don't know when between 1905 and 1980 he said this, but I suggest it probably was in the 30s. Now, any guitar players in here? This is the ideal electric guitar player apparatus, the blame shifter. So you can dial how much shame do you want to experience, and how much innocence do you want to proclaim. And really probably the best, I mean, I've played in rock and roll bands since I was 14, the one on the right, the diversion. Who else do you want to blame? Do you want to blame the keys, the keyboard player? You want to blame the drummer. That's always a good one because he sits behind everybody else, although that can be dangerous. He's got things he can throw at. Maybe the bassist, or on the far right, the vox, which of course in musical terms is the vocalist. So, you know, it's good if you have that switch, you're kind of cruising along and something's coming your way, you can kind of hit that and immediately shift that blame to someone else. It's just very self-protective, you know. It's a very nice thing to be able to do. It's just not me, it's not my bad. So the other thing that we've really been part of our ideas are to focus on, to suggest that focus on what is wrong is maybe not so helpful. Good relationships are the key to mental health. What a great idea. I was so glad that when Glasser came up with this revolutionary idea. And here's the quote. Our ability to develop good, satisfying, trusting relationships is the key to good mental health. Okay. Now, some folks have disparaged John Bowlby in attachment theory. He's considered one of the psychodynamic theorists, and yet maybe he was onto something. Okay, so often we work to change the context of the problem. Always, you know, one of the things that I've learned as a social worker and a therapist is sometimes that we do what we call reframe the situation. Talk about the situation from a different perspective. Sometimes folks now are talking about, when a person talks to you about their problem, they're telling you their narrative. How do you get them to shift that a little bit? And of course, Dr. Woebling talks a lot about that in his books too, about how do you reframe things? Well, Glasser does that simply by, when the person says, well, I just have this headache all the time. And he starts asking you about your important relationships. He's just reframed the whole conversation. This is a conversation about what's important to you, what you really want, what you really need, and your most important relationships. Yes, and the other incredible reframe of choice theory and reality therapy is to suggest that our symptoms and our difficulties and our worries are actually behaviors. And these are actually behaviors that are helpful to us. I mean, the first time I used this, I was talking to a woman, she said, I just feel kind of anxious all the time and kind of dizzy, and sometimes it gets worse. And I just couldn't help her. I kept figuring it out. She wouldn't sit still for a little bit of deep breathing and relaxation. And suddenly it occurred to me, you know, this really might be useful to her. And so I said, well, is there any time that being anxious and kind of dizzy helps you? Now, you're thinking about the book where Glasser talks about, why do we choose misery? Well, I was thinking about that too. She wouldn't have said, in fact, she was a little bit incensed when I said, are you suggesting that I'm anxious and dizzy on purpose? No, I'm just curious as to how it might be helpful to you. Is there any time when it has really relieved you of something that you didn't want to do? She said, well, it kind of gets worse whenever my mother comes to visit. Oh, okay, well, we're there. So what about your relationship with your mom? Oh, she's so negative and she's so critical, and I just cry at night when she comes to visit me. Now we've got something to work on. We've got the relationship that's a current relationship with her mother, and we worked on setting boundaries. We also worked on her relaxing herself and that sort of thing. But reframe the problem in terms of that you call an awful symptom is something perhaps that's very helpful to you. And some folks even talk about the idea of befriending the symptom. Often we're afraid of that. Someone comes in and says, well, I'm hearing voices. Well, let's talk about that a little bit. Is that something that might be helpful to you? Is that something that's useful to you? Do you ever give you good advice about things? What's going on? Well, another person that's kind of a current therapy that works on changing the context is Stephen Hayes with acceptance and commitment therapy. He says, we really shouldn't be talking about the problems people have. We should help them to tune into what their experience is. We should help them to calm, to be mindful, and to appreciate their experience fully. And he offers a very challenging statement. That pathology arises from our avoidance of experience. Now, to me, this is choice theory, because if you're working with me, we're going to work through that. I'm going to want to know what it is that you want. I'm going to want to know what it is that you're doing and feeling. And I'm going to want to know what's the difference between the two. That your experience is so uncomfortable is you're not getting what you need. You're not getting what you want. Another one of those therapies that thinks it has nothing to do with the classroom, of course. But okay, so the other thing that he suggests that I think is very useful for us is Stephen Hayes says, well, then commit to be very aware and sit with your experience, let yourself feel the grief, the fear, the anxiety, and now think about, and we used to use this in class or institute, we used to say, what do you want? No, what do you really want? And that question was about, and I still use that in a sense, it sort of says, what, according to your values, what kind of person do you want to be? What kind of life do you want to have? What is health to you? What is the higher level of what you really want for yourself? How can we help you get into tune with that? Okay. People are self-motivated. I'm going to skip through a little bit of this because I'm feeling more and more like I'm talking at you, and I want you to talk back to me. So take your cards there, if you will, and on your table we can have a little bit of discussion about what ideas are central to what we do that I haven't talked about yet. We're not supposed to say, okay? But who have been great workers and thinkers in this area. We are drawn to celebrate and facilitate the best of our free will. We believe in free will. We must, or we wouldn't be here talking about choice. We don't believe that everything is determined ahead of time. That's why you heard Glasser never talk about personality. That implies that we don't have free will. We stand for our continuous learning of how to implement these ideas in our lives. We stand for teaching these great ideas to the world. So I'm going to suggest that we end with our chant. Amusa, musa, musa. Amusa, musa, musa.